Are you looking to take your personal finances to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Monday Money Tip Podcast, presented by I Was Broke, Now I'm Not, with your host, Joseph Sangle.
Well, welcome to the Monday Tip Podcast, presented by Fully Funded Life. We are fired up to help you, yes, you, live your fully funded life. And today is episode number 222. It's the start of October. We are fired up to be able to serve you today. And this is going to be a special episode. As you can tell, I do not have a co-host with me today. I have a special guest. I'll introduce him here in just a minute. But I wanted to start by saying that this month on the podcast, we're talking about all things investing. And one of the most important investments you could ever make is in your relationships. And of course, the supreme relationship there on this earth is the relationship of marriage. And today, we are excited to have a marriage expert with us, Brad Rhoads of Grace Marriage. And so I'm actually going to show their website here real quick, just so you can all see it at grace.marriage. And this is what we know about Brad. Brad graduated from Furman University. So our international headquarters is here in Anderson, South Carolina. About 35 minutes up the road is at one of the most glorious college campuses called Furman University. I did some of my prereqs for grad school on campus there. He also graduated from the University of Kentucky, the Wildcats College of Law, and practiced law in Nashville, Tennessee, and Owensboro, Kentucky for over 22 years. He was ordained as pastor of marriage at his local church in 2011, serving marriage ministry, counseling, and pastoral care. And he practiced law until 2015, when he transitioned to full-time work with Grace Marriage. He writes marriage materials, leads marriage groups, marriage conferences, and has developed marriage ministry models to help churches, organizations, and individual couples. Brad has been married to his wife, Marilyn, for 26 years, and they have 5 awesome kids. Welcome to the podcast, Brad.
Hey, glad to be here.
Hey, I am so excited to have this conversation with you as we kick off this investing month here at Fully Funded Life. So first, tell me a little bit about this background of Furman University. How did you end up at Furman?
One word, tennis. So I wanted to play college tennis, and Coach Scarpa, when I went down there on a recruiting visit, talked me into coming down. That's the only school I applied to. Now, when I got down there, I realized I wasn't nearly as good at tennis as I thought I was. So had a little bit of humble pie, but it was tennis is what took me there. My uncle went to Furman, played football there, and he made it a little bit of his mission to get me to go there as well too. So
that's awesome. It's always good to have that family pushing you there. They're kind of reliving their glory years. Mm-hmm. The Paladins, Furman University, right up the road, and then you ended up at Kentucky College of Law, and it's Go Blue right up there.
Go Big Blue. Go Big Blue.
I see you're wearing a blue shirt.
Go Blue is Michigan. Go Big Blue is Kentucky. So be careful.
I stand corrected. I like this. This is when you know it's a real fan, when they can explain and delineate which blue they are. They are Big Blue. And I see you're wearing a blue shirt. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that Brad's wearing a blue shirt. Is that happenstance that you chose blue for Grace Marriage, or is it because you love Big Blue that much?
It would be happenstance on the shirt, but you're actually wearing Michigan blue. I'm wearing Kentucky blue, so it fits the conversation.
Well, I would tell you this is totally by accident. Since I'm a Purdue fan, I'm never going to be rooting for Michigan, although they do put out some really good teams from time to time. Hey, I am so honored to have you as part of the podcast today, to introduce you to a lot of our audience. Tell us how you ended up starting Grace Marriage. What compelled you? I mean, you studied law, you passed the bar, you practiced for 2 decades, and suddenly here's Grace Marriage. What compelled you to do that?
Well, that's an interesting story, and I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. So I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. I just made a pact that I'm not going to date anybody for a year. I've just been in dating relationships. It seems not working out for me, and even worse for the people that have the unfortunate happenstance of dating me. So I decided a year break's what I need. Then I met Marilyn Hudson. 8 months later, I was married.
Wow.
I mean, I couldn't believe she existed, much less she liked me. I mean, she was gorgeous. She loved the Lord. She was spontaneous. She's from Kentucky. She she touched all the bases and found new bases. You know,
Wow.
she was amazing. So neither one of us could imagine having any trouble in marriage. I mean, my goodness, we like crazy about one another. And we really didn't have our first fight until our wedding reception, you know.
Oh,
So we've actually, I mean, my
you
wife,
made it that long, huh?
oh, I was rude to the photographer, and she's like, "Oh my goodness, he has that gear I didn't know he had." And yeah, I said, "Why don't we just stop so you can take one more picture?" And I just stared at him, and Marilyn's like, "Oh my goodness." And Marilyn says the honeymoon was over before the honeymoon was over. Within a year, I'll spare the details, but she prayed, "Lord, am I sentenced to a life of this?" I turned and put all my energy into building a law practice and did not put my energy into her. I invested a lot of time and resources into building a great law practice and doing a lot of things, but not into her. So everything was going well, perceived, but my marriage. And so then God intervened. God showed Marilyn, your hope's not in bread, it's in Jesus Christ and Christ alone. And Jesus is sufficient. So she came to me and said, "Look, will you forgive me? I've put hope in you, and all my hope's in Christ." So our marriage became stable. Then the Lord totally broke me. And it may be when I was saved, but it was like, I realized, love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave his life for her. Well, I didn't really give up anything for her, much less my life. Live with her in an understanding way. Do you just sit and talk to her and seek understanding? Zero. Don't be harsh with your wife. I use my wit in a painful way. She would be laughing and extremely angry all in the same moment, you know? So God broke me, and I came home and I told her, "Look, babe, the only thing that's going to be different is everything." And I knew God had changed me. And I wasn't even worried about being temporary. I told her, "I know you probably think this is a 3-week fad, but in 5 years, I want to ask you, did God change your husband?" So that started a great marriage. We just started having a blast. I mean, dated every week, started investing in our marriage. And then this is where Grace Marriage starts getting started. The youth started saying, "Will you do our premarital counseling and not our pastors?" I'm like, "Well, why?" They said, "We want what you have. That looks fun." So we did it. Then we did another. Then we did another. Then we started a group. And I don't know why God had given us favor with marriages, but we had about a 2-year waiting list for our group.
Wow.
Then I got ordained as pastor. It's for marriage. And then next thing you know, I look at our church and we have premarital counseling and crisis counseling. So I realized the only thing we're missing in our marriage ministry is the marriage itself. And then when I looked at other churches, that was normative. Most churches have a premarital process. And if you get to a point where you absolutely hate one another, they'll beg you to stay married and pour a ton of resources trying to help you not get divorced. And I'm like, what a terrible strategy. That's like, let's get to chapter 7, chapter 11, and then let's talk to you about finances. You know, so I realized it was a terrible strategy. And then we developed an ongoing marriage ministry platform for our church. And we patterned it after business coaching. And it worked. And then I realized we're never going to change the direction of family in our country unless we change how people do marriage and how churches do marriage. So I felt led to leave the practice of law in 2015 with the big picture goal of God moving, changing how people do marriage. Right now, 72% of churches have no marriage ministry. And our goal is that every Bible-believing church would have a marriage platform to help people thrive so they never experience the pain of crisis. So that's the 5-minute version of my 22 years. So.
Wow. I think that's incredible. I remember sitting at a leadership conference, and I think there was like 8, really well-known senior church leaders that were there going to speak. And the very first guy comes out and he starts out his talk by saying, "Do you want to be used greatly by God?" And the whole place was filled with ministry leaders, and maybe 2,500 of us or so. And of course, everybody responds, "Well, yes, we want to be used greatly by God." And he's like, "Great. Well, first he must wound you deeply, because it is out of your wounding that you're more able to effectively minister." And I just was reminded of that as you shared, as your marriage and that sort of thing was struggling. and God broke you, you were wounded,
Mm-hmm.
and you know what bad looks like and you know what great looks like, and it compelled you to do something about it.
Yeah,
That fires me up.
yeah, and the wounding thing, God showed me there's a godly sorrow in 2 Corinthians that a worldly sorrow leads to death, a godly sorrow leads to an excitement to change.
Ooh.
Yes, every tear made sense. Yes, I'd been selfish as could be. I'd been an absolute jerk. But it's like God said, Brad, I've got much better for you. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't feel condemned because there's no condemnation in Christ. I was full of 100% excitement and thought, I'm going to go back and she's going to be the best loved woman that she could ever imagine being from this point forward. So it really, God filled me not only with conviction, but 100% excitement and motivation. He doesn't convict us to tear us down. He convicts us to move us to better places.
That is so good. We're in an investing month, and when you're talking about, hey, I'm committed to making sure that Marilyn is the best loved woman on planet Earth. Is it appropriate for us to use investing language, like to say, I invested in my marriage? Is it too much to draw a comparison to financial terminology?
No, it's what does Scripture say? Sowing and reaping. You sow much, you reap much. You sow little, you reap little. And I tell people in individual counseling that come in, I say, tell me what you both individually are doing to invest in your marriage. Creative energy, money, effort. And they both look at me like, and I'm like, nothing. And I'm like, well, let me ask you a question. If you turn 65 and you've never made one deposit in a 401k or an IRA or anything, you turn 65 and you come to me and say, I'm so angry. Why are you angry? Well, we don't have a retirement. Well, you say, well, you didn't put anything in it. And I said, you're not investing anything in marriage and you're not gaining anything from it. So it's a perfect analogy. Couples that invest time, money, and energy into marriage thrive in marriage. Those that don't become stagnant, either settle into a coexistence that not go God glorifying, or B, one of them decides they don't want to do it anymore and they blow up and live the rest of their life in some degree of dysfunction.
The language is really important to hear there, because you live with, some sort of coexistence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think anybody who's married would say, well, I don't want that. That doesn't sound good. And then the idea of blowing it up doesn't sound good. So as investors, we're talking, we talk a lot when we're helping people with investing to pay attention to ROI, the return on investment. And so you mentioned time, money, energy being invested in marriage. What are some outcomes that you could measure that our listeners could think of as how could they measure the return on energy, or maybe even, the ROE, the return on effort, if they do focus time, money, energy into their marriage?
Yeah,
how's that measurable?
That's a great question. And one of the reasons people don't invest in relationship is because you don't see like a tangible increase in your account.
Right.
You don't see like, oh, wow, you've had $1,000. Now you have $1,400.
Yeah, I can't pull it up on the app.
You can't pull up the app and say, okay, Marilyn, oh, wow, I'm at a 9.2, But with the over time, what you find is your ROI. Well, one, if you look at your risk, if you want to go broke, get divorced. If you want a complete 50% reduction in all assets instantly, get divorced. If you want to superimpose on that, child support and attorney's fees, that if you have young kids go on for 15, 18 years, really nothing's worse for you financially than marital breakdown. So you don't invest in marriage to protect your finances, but in reality, investing in marriage protects everything. Yeah. Because if marriage doesn't work, as a friend of mine in Atlanta said, nothing works.
That's
nothing
the truth.
works. I talked to a friend this weekend. He said he's extremely successful, well off financially, does great. His marriage was struggling, and literally, he was absolutely miserable and about to explode inside. Now his marriage is stable. He's doing better and everything else is working. So when you're talking about return on investment, your return on investment is I get to do life with my very best friend. We date once a week. I have things to look forward to. We laugh together. We enjoy one another in every way. The return on investment, investing in my marriage, is the better return than any investment I make in life other than time with Jesus himself.
Yeah, it's the most powerful force in the world, love. I mean, that is one of the greatest outcomes. You know, when you think about your approach, and I've enjoyed our conversations that we've had as we prepared for this time together. Your approach is unique, and it really stands out to me. So I just want to set it up for everybody who's listening. You know, think about when maybe you've went to a church that had a marriage conference, and you went to a marriage conference. Our church has had a marriage conference maybe once a year or so, and there's several very good marriage conferences out there. But one of the things that really stood out to me, and you've just referenced it earlier, is most churches really have nothing related to marriage. 72% have no marriage ministry, but the ones that do, they have premarital, and then they have crisis and nothing for the middle. But you have an approach that God gave you to go alongside, walk alongside all the time. It's not a one-time moment, a one weekend moment. Kind of describe the approach that you guys have crafted together there at Grace Marriage.
Well, everything takes ongoing attention to thrive. Okay. If you're counseling people in finances and every 3 years they make one investment into a Roth or an IRA, is that a good approach? No, it takes consistent investment over a long period of time, and then it has incredible results. And that's the same with marriage. We have a model. Once every 90 days, you get out of your marriage and you work on your marriage. You take 4 hours once every 90 days, you celebrate wins, you address issues, you schedule your quarter together, you connect and you talk at a deep level, and you leave excited about making the next quarter better than the quarter before. And you do that on an ongoing basis. Basically, our rhythm of investment is once every 90 days, we stop and we assess and we make sure we're moving forward, and we make sure there's nothing sliding into our marriage that's going to grow up and kill us. That's one of the models. The other model fits within church small groups, Sunday school, community groups. You do 6 weeks in the spring, 6 weeks in the fall, and you do you do sessions. Now in a session, it's not your typical, you got to listen to Brad for 45 minutes and then that's it. You get a brief teaching about 10 minutes, then you have space to write and talk with your spouse about implementation. Because I see an implementation gap. People hear all these great stuff, but they go home and it's not long they're doing life just like they did before. Because I noticed on your conference deal you mentioned, I'm fine with conferences, but they typically have diminishing returns over time with a return to previous norm. So we want people to get an ongoing mentality of investment so their marriage is a marriage of lifetime growth. It's not a marriage of stagnancy with every now and then spikes when they feel convicted to hit a conference or a 6-week study.
That stands out to me as so different. And it's really attractive because we say a statement around here at Fully Funded Life all the time, that money is a journey, not just a moment. Mm-hmm. But if we're not careful, moments can ruin the whole journey. Mm-hmm. And I think you could substitute the word marriage there, that marriage is a journey, not just a moment, but moments can destroy that journey. So you're partnering with people for the journey. It's what birthed Fully Funded Life was. You know, I would do these 2-hour events, and some churches would have me back year after year after year. And I would see the same person, the same couple there 3 years in a row, 4 years in a row. And I'm like, hey, this is basically the same thing. Why are you here? And they're like, oh, we're so fired up. We get so fired up. Well, okay, what changes have you made since last year? Well, not any. That's why we're here, to get back fired up. And I was like, you know, maybe it speaks to my ability to speak at a conference, but I think it speaks more to this fact that people need ongoing coaching. They need ongoing assistance to pull them out of daily life And I love how you said it, to work on the marriage, to get outside of daily life. So when you're putting together these resources, and I'm assuming you and your team are putting together these new resources every quarter, is that right?
We'll have 7 years of content. So you'll
7
get
years of content.
new content every quarter, or new content every 6 weeks in the spring and the fall. And to your event, like an event can ruin the journey. When you're doing the journey right, like you're regularly revisiting marriage, you're focusing on good things, you're staying together, the journey prevents the event. If somebody's in regular good financial teaching and they're regular putting an IRA, they're regularly saving, they're unlikely to go out and borrow $60,000 on a new car. I mean, because it's front of mind, good financial principles that protects them against that event.
Right.
So when couples have an event, whether it's an affair, whether it's just leaving, whatever, usually the event is precipitated by a stagnant journey that set them up for the event. So, I totally agree with what you say, but also would add that when you do the journey right, it protects you against some stupidity.
So what you're saying is it's like bowling. You got the guardrails up there, so there's no way you go in the gutter.
Right.
I like it. That's awesome.
You don't drift as far.
So when you go to prepare this content and you're thinking about all the souls that you're going to impact, all the people that are going to be receiving this, is there like a driving statement or a reminder or a word like that when you go to record this, to prepare this content, what keeps you centered on the vision of Grace Marriage when you're preparing that content?
It's a great question. The answer is grace. The advance is all hope is the forgiveness of sins through Jesus Christ and Him granting us grace. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And how do we love one another like that? So Romans 6:14 says, sin will have no dominion, no mastery, no control over you because you're under grace, not law. So sin will have no dominion, mastery, or control over marriage if it's under grace. I make mistakes. Marilyn makes mistakes. We have a great marriage. Why? It's not because I'm great. Marilyn's great because Jesus Christ is perfect. We've received forgiveness and we grant forgiveness. We've received grace. We've grant grace. Therefore, Marilyn makes mistakes. I make mistakes. But guess what? It does not control our relationship. And we have a blast despite that.
That's
now, we
so
make
good.
it clear that doesn't apply to abuse and infidelity. It doesn't mean you don't address issues. But overall, a foundation, the only solid foundation is the foundation of the forgiveness of grace of Jesus Christ. So everything has to be Christ-centered, because unless the Lord builds it, it is built in vain. So we always remind ourselves that it's not about like empowering two people to be these amazing folks. It's basically two people to rely on a perfect Savior and trust in Him so they can find rest, they can find peace, and because they're delighted in, they can delight in others. Because they've been given grace, they can give grace to others. Because they've been loved so well, they can love well.
That is outstanding. I love that word grace. And I think as humans, a lot of times we're kind of gravitate towards truth telling and saying why the other person's wrong and why we're right, and kind of being in that mire of victimhood. But grace throws all that away. And when I've had the privilege of being the officiant at a wedding, you always get those 3 or 4 minutes where you get to share something with this new couple. And the one thing that I love to share is I look at him, I look at her and say, the best you can do the rest of your life is make 0 mistakes. And how likely is that to happen? There's no chance. So here's what I would tell each of you: rush to forgiveness. And that's really what you're saying. You rush to grace. You've got to do it. I think that thing when I see young couples particularly, but sometimes as couples been married for a while and they're stagnant and they're so upset that their spouse did this or that, and they just can't let it go. And it's like, well, what expectation did you have? Did you have an expectation that they would make 0 mistakes? And the fact is, we're humans. We're going to make mistakes. And when you choose, and it is a choice, to rush to forgiveness, what a blessing that is in marriage.
And now we have a session called Two Sides to Every Nickel. There's tremendous good in everybody and tremendous fault in everybody. Do you look at heads or you look at tails? And if you dwell on what's wrong, you'll come to hate your spouse. If you dwell on what's right, you'll come to like your spouse. And there's a couple we've been working with, and she shifted in her mind to looking at what's right. And within 2 weeks, she went from not being able to stand the individual to liking him a lot.
Wow.
But it just took a battle in the mind. That's why Scripture says, take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And then in Philippians, if anything is excellent and praiseworthy, dwell on these things. And in most spouses, there are excellent attributes about them. And when that is dwelled on, thought on, it actually helps your spouse improve much more than looking at them with enmity and condemnation and making them feel all the time like the biggest failure.
That's so good. You think, if we kind of explore that, let's go down granular level a little bit in our few minutes that we have together left. What are 3 or 4 practical ways that all of our listeners, because, we have, hundreds of people going to listen to this podcast. There's no doubt that people are in different phases of their journey in their marriage. Some are stagnant. They understand the coexistence. Others, they can't stand the sight of each other. Others are doing well. What are 3 or 4 practical ways that as they're listening, they could invest more in their marriage?
Yeah, and I'll start. If you're in an emotional abuse, physical abuse, infidelity, or just a point where you can't talk without it being absolutely toxic, get professional help immediately and get more rather than less. I'm always a big believer. It's better to have too much help than too little. So there you go. So that's the side note. Now, what I would say is, 1, spend time together weekly and undistracted. If you spend 3 to 5 hours a week of undistracted time together over a long period of time, you will find that it has a tremendous impact on your marriage. Meryl and I have been on a date once a week for the last 25 years. And we've had 5 kids, we've had health crisis, we've had deaths, we've had periods where every day my wife cried the entire day, but we've had a rigid, legalistic, we will spend time together. So 1, date weekly. 2, make sure you talk every day. Even if it's 20 or 30 minutes, tell the kids, hey, leave us alone if you have kids. And if you don't have kids, it's a little easier. But just make sure you know what's going on in each other's heart and you know what's going on in each other's day. Because Satan's job is to isolate you and disconnect you from one another. And you want to stay together. So date weekly, talk daily, and then if physically possible, come together physically in your sexual relationship. There is power in physical intimacy beyond what we can really understand. Outside of marriage, it's resulted in people doing the stupidest things in history. And in marriage, it has the same power. So Satan's saying, let's get them to quit spending time together. Let's get them to quit talking. Let's have them not come together physically. And then over time, I can kill that marriage. So I've not had any couples, Joe, come to me and say, we're coming together regularly physically. We talk every day. We date every week, and we don't know what happened. We hate one another. No, couples that invest in their marriage like that do well, and couples that don't.
Wow. Those are 3 very practical things. I love it. So let's talk about the spending time together weekly. When I see couples that have young kids and everything, it can become very quickly all about the kids.
Oh my goodness.
And this sporting event, this activity, all that stuff. You've navigated five kids and yet been able to hold to that. So that tells me you've been creative with your scheduling to be able to make sure that happened. So our date night, is it only date nights? Is it only, from 6 to 8 on Thursday? Or what are some ways that you've seen people get very creative with ensuring that date happen?
We've done Sunday afternoons, we've done Friday nights, and we realized we don't have to be at every sporting event and every practice. And the best thing we can do for our kids is to prioritize our marriage. And Scripture puts the marriage the #1 horizontal relationship. And if I don't have time for the number one horizontal relationship because I'm running my 5-year-old to a soccer game, I've got a jacked up perspective. So we tell our kids the best thing we can do for you is to have a great marriage, which creates a wonderful atmosphere in the home. And if that means missing a few of your games here and there, not neglecting them, but just, hey, they survive. I mean,
Yeah.
they can go to a cross-country meet with another family while Marilyn and I spend 6 or 7 hours together here and there. And guess what? They're actually better off for it.
Absolutely.
Compare that to living with me with another wife, Marilyn with another husband, with visitation schedules and all that complexity. I've told them over and over, I said, look, you don't realize this, but you want Marilyn and I to leave you and go on a date. Because you have no idea what your life would look like if we couldn't stand one another, or if we broke down. And we're human, and it's happened to better people than us.
Yeah, that's so good. I think maybe a couple people just wrecked their car with the idea of missing their kid's sporting event. But I think that is such a fantastic reminder. It's eye-opening. I think it's seriously like saying, hey, we have to have time to spend on a budget. If we don't spend that 1 hour on a budget, well, the finances can quickly derail. The same thing with marriage. If you can't find the time regularly to spend on that, it can very quickly derail.
And if you say it's the most important horizontal relationship and you can't find time for it, just change your verbiage and don't tell me it is, because it's actually not.
Wow.
Because you put time, money, and resource into what's important. So I tell people either A, quit telling me how important it is, or B, treat it that way.
Wow.
I'm just going to demand consistency.
I love it. I can hear a little bit of the attorney side of Brad come out there. I love it. Convicted might be the word that many of us feel, but also in grace, which is awesome. So,
and in churches, I was like, your churches, you preach marriage is the most important horizontal relationship, and you spend no ministry dollars and have no marriage ministry. I said, no condemnation, but you can't win with children and youth with weekly programming. You can't overcome family dysfunction with weekly programming. It's like a two-legged stool that won't stand. Unless you impact the home, you won't impact children and youth, because the health of the parents' marriage is going to impact the youth much more than your Wednesday night service. Now, I'm not against children and youth ministries. My kids are in both. But unless we impact the marriage, help it last, help it thrive, and create a gospel atmosphere in the home, it's unlikely we change our next generation. I say it's like trying to fix a hole in a dam by buying new shop vacs.
It doesn't make much sense, does it?
It doesn't.
Well, hey, how can people learn more about Grace Marriage?
Just go to gracemarriage.com and you can reach out to us through that. We have both an at-home where you can work on your marriage at home, and we have Grace Marriage Church where you can work through a church ministry. If your church does not have a marriage ministry, please reach out to us and we will reach out to your church, because our goal, every church prioritize marriage, every couple prioritize marriage.
It's fantastic. And I know pastors who've implemented Grace Marriage at their church, and they say it's the most important thing that they've done in the history of their ministry. So I encourage leaders, church leaders listening, hey, contact Brad and his team. And if you're an individual, hey, go up to gracemarriage.com. We'll have links in the show notes. Thanks so much, Brad, for being a part of this today and investing in our marriages.
And Joe, thanks for having me. And thank you so much for your ministry to so many.
Fired up. Hey, I'm going to say our verse of the day is Genesis 2:24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother, hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And when you're one and half of you is not operating well, or your both halves aren't, well, that's not going to be very good. We want you to operate well. That's why we're kicking off Investing Month on the most important thing, not money, your marriage. And so next week, we're going to talk about when should you start investing for retirement. Make sure you check in with that next Monday. If you like today's episode, please help us get this podcast to other people who could benefit. You can do it by quickly rating the podcast, leaving a review. If you're on YouTube, you can click the subscribe button, click the little bell, and notify you every Monday when a new episode releases to help you live a fully funded life. And if you've implemented one of our tips, Please, please, please share your success stories with us. You can email it to us at info at fullyfunded.life, or share it on any of our social media platforms. This podcast is powered by your success. Until next week, hey, this week, apply those 3 principles. Schedule some time to spend together with your spouse this week and next week and for the next month. Plan to talk every day for at least 20 minutes, uninterrupted. Find out how the heart of your spouse is doing and how their day went, and spend time physically. It is something very powerful. It helps you invest in your marriage. Practical things. Thanks so much to Brad and the team at Grace Marriage. We're so grateful. We'll see you next week. Get fired up.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Monday Money Tip Podcast, presented by I Was Broke, Now I'm Not. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And for more great content and to stay up to date, visit iwbnin.com. We'll catch you next time.